Hey everyone, how's it going? Happy weekend. My name is Jennifer Kretschmer, and we are here to talk about access, disability, and inclusion in tabletop RPGs. I have an incredible panel who I am going to introduce in just a moment, but I will quickly start with a disclaimer. Many of us are working on projects that we cannot discuss. NDAs are rampant in this phenomenal group of panelists. So we will be kind of keeping the conversation focused on things that we can. But feel free to ask questions, put them up in chat, and we'll go from there. I am a performer, a writer, a director, and a producer on television. I also am very, very active in the tabletop community. I am on Beyond Heroes, on D&D Beyond, and do all sorts of other fun things. I also created, executive produced, and was in Monsters and Fables. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. I'm not going to request anyone on the panel to disclose their disability if they do not want to. That's disclosure is a very personal decision, and so people are welcome to always disclose or not disclose as much as they'd like to. What my condition means is that I have wonky joints, which sometimes make walking hard, among other things, and I have a number of other connected conditions. But I am an ambulatory wheelchair user, which means sometimes I walk, sometimes I use a cane, sometimes I use a wheelchair. So I call myself the riddle of the Sphinx. And yeah, that's me. I do a lot of disability activism. I've been academically working on disability for about 15 plus years. Wow. Yeah, living in this body since long before I knew the words to describe what was going on with it. I also work with 50/50 by 2020, which is a branch of Time's Up, headed up by Joey Soloway, who created Transparent and did all sorts of other major work in Hollywood. And their initiative, it's the first time that we've had a coalition of disabled people specifically working on inclusion in the way that we work, so in Hollywood. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just go down the panelist list. Let's see, let's go to my right with Honey.
Hello everybody, I'm Honey, aka Honey and Dice. I consider myself medically challenged with a lot of chronic illnesses and scarring, some of them from birth, some of them from circumstances. I am the host of Tea with Honey. I'm the creator of the Embrace the Initiative workshop, helping to create more comfortable and confident DMs, GMs in our space. And there's a huge part of that workshop that has to do with accessibility. So I was very excited to see other people as passionate about that as I am. I do a lot of work with organizations and charities that help children, especially children from lower income families that have medical challenges, disabilities, both mental and physical, as well as educating parents and families on internet safety and awareness. So I try to use gaming and things that I love to connect to all of that. And so I'm really, really, really excited and very, very, very touched that Jen asked me to join this today.
Temple.
Hello, everybody. I'm Blind Temple, at Blind Temple on Twitter. I help the blind play D&D. I help them find games and introduce people that have never played it to the game, to the D&D. I try once a month to explain the blind and blind gaming to sightlings, answering any questions you might have. I'm blind, as is in the name, so that's kind of disclosed. And I also have end-stage kidney disease. And I'm willing to answer any question you might have about any of those things. Don't worry about embarrassing yourself or fear of offending me. Any honest question, I'm fine with answering.
Awesome. Yeah, and I do want to say this is a place to ask those questions. This is the time. We are here to answer the questions that you may not be sure quite how to ask. that's what we're here to do, is have a conversation about those things, and start breaking down those stigmas and getting rid of a lot of the fear that surrounds disability. Alicia.
Hi, I'm Alicia Marie. I'm Alicia Marie Body because I come from fitness on Twitter. I am an author and costume artist and fitness pro, like I said. I am actually deaf. According to the deaf culture and community, I'm a lowercase d because I do not know, sadly, I do not know American Sign Language. I am relatively new to advocacy because I think everybody, when they have what they consider an inability, they go through sort of a little bit of a personality and emotional changes. I started going deaf, started losing my hearing very kind of semi-late in life. I was about 25. So it took a while for me to come to terms with it because I wasn't in the culture and I wasn't surrounded by people who could support and help me get through that part. So I withdrew a lot from friends, life, things I would love to do. I underwent controversial, especially in the culture, cochlear implant surgery in September, which allowed me to move easier in the hearing world. And what I realized in going and having the surgery and being able to hear with my CI was that because I can now move easier in the hearing world, to use that advantage to give a voice to people who are deaf, hard of hearing, so that they can participate in life, because I know that I didn't do a lot as a result of feeling that I couldn't. The D&D community has been very welcome to me and very understanding and very patient. And I'm really excited to be on this panel of other people who are advocates. And I'm just happy to be here. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Alicia is a newer friend, and I'm so thrilled that she's here. I'm sorry, and we didn't do pronouns. We should do pronouns. I'm sorry. She, they. Let's just go back in the same order briefly. If you can put your state your pronouns as well.
She, her.
He, him.
She, her.
Cool. So next up, I think we have next is Mac. In order.
I'm Mackenzie Lane DA on Twitter. I use she, her pronouns, and I am autistic, which is a new thing for me, and I'm currently in that process of accepting my place in the disability community, which is fun. My experience with autism, for me, it manifests a lot as me being unable to read facial expressions. So I have a hard time, unless it's more exaggerated and I know the person really well, I have a really hard time reading facial expressions when people are happy or sad or uncomfortable. And it's basically like if you put a grid of people in front of me and told me to identify the ones that are smiling, I'd get about half right. I also struggle a lot with words. I have a speech impediment because of my autism, which I also just found out about, and I will sometimes go nonverbal, especially when I get on days when I like right now. I struggle sometimes putting together words and my brain gets a little scattered, and so sometimes I'll just sort of shut up. And I'm really excited to talk about this because it's something super new for me in my discovery. And there aren't a lot of people who talk about autism beyond kind of what you see in media, and especially like there's so many people who say like people who have autism shouldn't play tabletop games because it's social or something like that. And I want to flip a big middle finger at them. So hi, I'm you can find me flipping said middle finger, doing a bunch of stuff in the D&D community as a game designer and writer. I'm lead writer of The Islands of Sina Una, an upcoming setting for 5e based around pre-colonial Filipino mythology. I stream over on Gilding Light every Friday in Zyra, playing an autistic character, which I'm super hype about. And I do a bunch of other stuff with D&D Beyond and MCDM and a bunch of other cool people on the internet. And yeah, that's why I'm here.
And Sarah.
Wait, hi, I'm Sarah. You might also know me as Mustang or Mustang's Up. Yeah, a disability advocate and also a consultant and sensitivity reader, and I also do writing now in the TTRPG sphere. I currently work for Artalsorian Games. I am writing for this lovely TTRPG, The Witcher. Currently writing a whole adventure. It's in playtesting at the moment. How exciting. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. There are a lot of versions of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You can actually look them up at if you type in just on Google, the Ehlers-Danlos Society, you can go there, get definitions, read from experiences of people who have Ehlers-Danlos across the spectrum. And you can also read medical papers, medical journals, things like that are made accessible, like kind of layman's terms for the public. You can access them for all free. And so you can kind of learn where medical science is at and stuff with that at the minute. I've also recently, because I'm very happy to talk about my experiences on Twitter and stuff if you follow me. I recently was diagnosed with osteoporosis. I'm 23 and I have osteoporosis and osteoarthritis. As you can probably tell from my hands today, because I've had a flare, I have nerve problems sometimes where my hands go a bit shaky under the chronic pain, chronic fatigue. I also make disability supplements for games on Patreon, where you basically pay for Patreon to get like early access, and then they're out in the public a few weeks later for completely free for pretty much a bunch of different TTRPGs I write for. I believe next month I'm writing a bunch of supplements for the Witcher TTRPG. So I'm doing disability and mages, mage prosthetics, and they kind of go with the Witchers and disability and the Witcher prosthetics that I've already done. And there's also going to be a disabled NPC with a whole bit on like how to run disability and GM it and roleplay it sensitively and such. But yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MustangZart.
Awesome. So let's get into it. Let's start out by kind of talking about terms. There are a lot of different ways that people approach, and so I kind of want to talk about first of all the language we use around disability. It's a complicated issue. There are two main models when you're talking about disability in disability theory. There is the medical model, which is historically what's been used, which is the idea of if you have X condition, it needs to be treated and you are missing that thing, or that thing is bad and needs to be fixed. There's also the social model, which is kind of the foundation of the disabled rights movement, right? And that is the social model says, in any population, there is going to be a diverse population. Like you're going to have diversity, and that is a strength to a population, scientifically. And that living in a different body than another it's the same as having a variety of heights or hair colors. And so that's kind of been foundational in disability. How do you find that those types of things show up in games? What do you find are the issues, and what would you like to see in terms of those issues, or in terms of the language we use surrounding disability, whether it's accurate terms, whether it's slurs? I know there are certain words that show up constantly in D&D, or not, in any game, most tabletop games that are not ideal. What are your thoughts on that? And I'm just this is gonna be open, I think. I'm not gonna call on people, but let's have a conversation.
There's a kind of this whole thing that I've noticed, especially in D&D, because I was reading over some books last night, to add the disability either kind of as an afterthought, or to say that they are a person with a disability, like the implication that they kind of drag it along with them rather than it being part of them. So I would much rather somebody say that I am a person, that I am a disabled person, than I am a person with a disability, like, because I don't
Same.
walk around and drag it on a leash with me, you
Right.
know. Like, it's very much a part of me, my identity. And I think society kind of has a lot of problems, like understanding the fact that disabled people aren't upset to have it be part of their identity. They seem to think, because they perceive disability to be bad, that like it would be something a person wouldn't want associated with their identity, when actually it's completely the opposite. Like, I've talked about it on Twitter before, but I have had an experience of internalized ableism when I was growing up.
Ableism, I'm sorry to jump in, but ableism, for anyone who knows, who isn't familiar with the term, is discrimination against disability.
Yeah. And I was like very harsh on myself and things, and it's kind of been liberating to now say, like, I'm a disabled person, not a person with a disability. Like, it's very much a part of me. When I stopped thinking of it as something that weighs me down and drags, like I have to drag it around with me, and more it's just a part of my life. And like, you know, there's so much more I can be than just that person with a disability. And I think a lot of people really struggle with understanding that, especially like I've seen it on Twitter as well. So
Yeah, in my case, blindness is something that everybody always assumes that you're trying to escape. That, you know, this is this horrible fate that's been inflicted upon you, and you would do anything to be able to have your sight. I did have a dozen surgeries when I first started losing my sight. But once I finally, it stabilized and I had a tiny amount of sight left and only one eye, my life got infinitely better. I'm much happier now than I ever was before. And I'm a much better person. And that's something that the able, they just don't understand, that it's not a horrible fate, that it's not a curse. It's just a different way of living.
Just in the chat, sorry, Be Never Ending said, isn't there a lot of variety and preference of people preferring disabled person versus person with disability? Yes, it very much, I found it tends to be older disabled people who say with a disability rather than disability first. And I think that's just because there has been a lot of more advocacy of disabled people now, and like I've noticed more young people use it, but it's definitely, I always respect that if a person wants to have a disabled person wants to say with a disability, I always say that.
Yes.
You know, it's always down to that one person.
It's how the person wants to identify, not how, but it's not for, you know, I think to jump off of that, what happened with the person first versus identity first is, for a long time there was this wave of that became often out of a non-disabled perspective about the disabled experience, saying, oh, but you should get them to recognize your humanity first, and then go, oh yeah, but there's also this other thing. And so the shift in what the disabled rights movement, and if you look at like the stuff that came out of disabled history and what the kind of leaders have been pushing for, like a lot of the disabled rights civil rights leaders have been pushing for, it's been, okay, we don't need to make people recognize that we exist as human beings. That needs to be implicit. We need to make people go, oh, disability is just part of humanity, and these are people, and it's getting the access is the problem. It's not the person that's the problem, it's the societal boundaries. I love the way that Stella Young in her TED Talk, which is the first thing I send anyone who's interested in looking at disability, just go on YouTube, grab Stella Young's TED Talk. She says, you know, no amount of me smiling and trying to prove my humanity at a staircase has ever turned it into a ramp. It just doesn't. That's not how it works. So that's a lot of where that shift has come from. So definitely the more modern era is to move past person first, which was tended to be put on by non-disabled people to try and convince disabled people to move forward on that. into what has actually been generated by the community itself. So
that's something I'm struggling with personally, with how I want to identify, because for a long time I was like, oh, I'm a person with autism, because I was like, it was me not accepting it myself. And so it's taken me a while to go like, no, I'm an autistic creator, and having that be a part of me. And that's been on my journey too, on realizing this is like, my brain works differently, and it's okay, and I don't have to pretend like I have a normal functioning brain, and it's okay for me to just flat out say, yeah, I'm autistic, suck it up. That's been super interesting to me, trying to reconfigure my brain to work on like, oh, when I say it like this, I'm saying that because I don't want to accept it myself. And so I'm learning now, like, oh, even if it's not like the most severe autism or whatever people call it, I'm still autistic, and it doesn't matter. So that's something I've been working on, and I'd like to see more representation of that in games, because there aren't a lot of neurodivergency isn't really addressed in games a lot. And when it is, it's not addressed well, because it's usually under the context of intelligence and low or high intelligence, or, oh, this person's really smart, but also they're quirky. Haha, it's fun. And it's like, could you maybe not? And that stems from like a lot of stereotypes about autistic folks of, oh, they're really smart, they're really good at math and science, but also they just can't do this socially and stuff. And I would love to see that being more representative, like the variety of the variety of ways autism can manifest in terms of like, oh, maybe you don't have to be good at like science, or you don't have to be some quirky science.
That actually, that brings us kind of to our next topic, which is talking about how disability is non-binary, and how the world thinks of that you are 100%. It's an on-off switch. If you are blind, you either have zero vision or you have 100% vision. There's no room for nuance. And the reality is 90% of blind people have some vision. The reality of the wheelchair user experience is many of us are ambulatory. It's not faking it if somebody gets out of their wheelchair, but many of us are terrified to do that in public because our cars get keyed or people call us fakers. It's the same with the deaf community. Like, the disabled experience is not binary. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that and how that translates to game mechanics, where you're dealing with like sets of numbers, which,
Okay, for me, I'm really new to D&D. Someone who completely identifies as deaf, but on a spectrum, because I was very much hard of hearing, but because speech was before my CI, and if I take my CI, it's impossible to hear anybody because everybody sounds like Charlie Brown's teachers. Remember Peanuts? That's what everyone sounds to me. So, but because I'm a freaky lip reader type person, I can have conversations with people, and people would, like you, Jennifer, would say, you're not really that deaf, because they can't perceive that. You know what I mean? So with D&D, it's something I never thought I could play, or I thought that it would be too awkward for other players, and I would be put in like so it gave me anxiety. I would be in a position where the people would feel bad, the players would feel bad about me saying what, or that I'd have to say what 15 times before I was able to understand, because even if I knew ASL, I don't know as many people like Jennifer. I mean, the fact that she knows ASL is amazing.
I'm not fluent at all. So I've taken some classes, that's all. So
I wish I did. I totally wish I did. But
we'll figure it out after quarantine's over.
Yeah, after quarantine, I'll take the work. But so I never really thought I could participate in a game. I think so moving into the community and seeing how things are handled, this is still very new to me. Being okay participating is still very new to me. What I've noticed is that I think there's a lot of people out there that exist on that spectrum of deafness or hard of hearingness, and they may not think that they can play. So they just don't even bother trying. And that's where I was, and only because I felt like people would not be as welcoming, because I thought, oh, they would think it's too hard, so they wouldn't invite me. What I would like people to do, if they can, sort of bring themselves to do this, is to don't be afraid to ask someone who is deaf to play, because they might want to try. And I think as far as language goes in games, in dealing with people with deafness, I think what Sarah and Mackenzie were saying, not to use it as kind of a something that is holding the character back, I guess. Something that, if you're writing in characters that can't hear, like stay away from like the tropes and the stereotypes, like Mackenzie was saying, like the person with autism doesn't have to be like a Hollywood version of autism where it's complete, you know what I mean? And with deafness, don't be afraid to put someone deaf in it. If you do not know sign language and you do not, I actually get offended if people use fake sign language. And I'm not even a sign language user, but I get offended when people throw it in like as if it's not like an actual language that should be respected. So I think it is. I think right now we're living in a time where sensitivity is important. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation. I'm learning a lot too myself.
I just want to point out in chat, someone said that they're curious about how DMs can handle or address situations in their campaigns where the view of disabilities would be less progressive compared to the modern viewpoint. Just because there's this kind of weird thing that goes around that D&D must be like the olden days, and it's not based on history at all. It's a fantasy land. There's magic, there's dragons, it's got Eberron, it's got plane jumping, spell jam as a part of it, so technically electricity is real. Like, you can't say that disabilities would be looked down upon in a land that's full of adventurers who will at some point get a debilitating injury that probably could cause a disability to evolve or a chronic illness. So like that's what I never kind of got when people are like, oh, but it's like based in the olden days, and they try and use that whenever I call out Curse of Strahd for things it's done regarding disability, and it's like,
but it was written in 2010. You don't have an excuse. It was written in 2010.
So here's the thing. Make your fantasy better than our reality. Like, it has to be better. Yeah. It has to be better. It's the place we can actually make change without even having to do anything. This is the easiest place to make the world better. Do that. But also, yes, in a world being constantly ravaged by monsters, where getting any sort of, any regeneration to regrow things or whatever is super expensive. Wouldn't it make a whole lot more sense to just build your buildings with accessibility in mind? So starting from that, the other thing that I was thinking about, and I told Sarah about this, if you have regeneration and you're going to regrow an arm, why not grow an extra one? 3 arms would be better than 2, right? So for the people who are like, well, why wouldn't they get that fixed? Why wouldn't you grow another arm? Why wouldn't you get 2 more eyes in the back of your head? Why not?
Yeah, exactly.
You can have just as much variety, if not more, in that world. So, and for anyone who watches Beyond Heroes, Olindra, Clan Monkey Mouse is a group of signing Ghostwise halflings, most of whom are deaf. So that's like, you build it into your world and make that a place and a people and a cultural thing. So I think we had a lot of...
was going to say something.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, honey.
So it's interesting to me when people talk about building accessibility into a setting and, all of these preconceived notions. And I come to D&D from a perspective of it's just my least favorite system ever. Like, I didn't play D&D until last year when somebody asked me, can you play it for charity? But I know systems because I love mechanics. So you give me a basic system, I'm going to go in and learn the system, but I'm probably going to leave the canon, the lore, the history, and so on behind, because I feel like that's someone else's story. So when going into creating settings and running games, and I run so many D&D games and stuff for people, and I tell people I don't own a single D&D supplement outside of a couple of things from D&D Beyond, they always stare at me like, well, how? because I create my own stories. In the world that I see is full of so many different people from so many different backgrounds. I have a mechanic that I use, and I've used it for a very long time, wherein if someone permadies and they come across, someone that can do a resurrection, we have like a 3 strikes you're out kind of mentality, and nobody dies 3 times in a game that I've ever ran. But I always say if the player is permadead and the players do not have the means of resurrection or revivify, and the story benefits from it, I'm gonna come up with a way to have this performed or done by an NPC or plot device. But the rules are: first, permadeath provides a permanent scar that doesn't vanish with any healing, because if you've died, that's gonna leave behind a scar, and scars are beautiful. They're proof that you've survived. Second, permadeath, I usually say it provides the need for some type of, wisdom save to steel yourself when faced with an attack or participating in a fight that resembles the fight that you were killed in. Because again, for in-character actions, there's in-character consequences. So if this exists in your world, like to your point, there's monsters, there's all these things happening. There has to be room for accessibility features in your buildings or the equipment that people use. And then having those conversations with your players is important, because you have some people that live with chronic pain. They don't want to play a game where they're in pain. This is why I stress having these conversations with your players ahead of time. You have some people where their handicaps or their I'm using handicaps as ableist language that they tell themselves, just to clarify here. But their disabilities, their inabilities, their medical challenges, they're still coming to terms with what that means to them. They don't want to play that out in a game. So being sensitive to your players and being sensitive to where they're coming from and where they are is very, very important, which is where that session 0 comes into place, so that you can handle those engagements with sensitivity and empathy. Because there's a difference between building it in because this is reality, but creating a safe place for your players as you play.
100%.
Yeah, because I'm playing an autistic character for the first time, and I remember being nervous about it, but then also like this was something I wanted to do, and I remember sitting down with my GM and going, can I do this? Would that be okay? Because this is something I want to explore. But if there's someone who wants to play in a game and doesn't want to deal with, the stress of having to mask neurodivergency or having to worry about getting overwhelmed and wanting to play a character that doesn't have to remember all of those things and really think about how to not survive, but get through a social situation that is easy for everyone, and instead just makes a roll and does it fine, like, that's, for some people, that's really helpful. And for me, that was really helpful for a while, getting to play a character who was like super suave and good in social situations. It was a way of leaving some of the stuff I was struggling with my brain behind. But it varies from day to day. Even with a person, someone can want to play it one day and then decide it's too much today. So just always keeping an ear open and keeping an open conversation, checking in with your players, that's always good things.
I put in, I haven't run an official product since the early 80s. I build on my own. And one of the things I've put in since I've lost my sight is that on some critical hits, you take damage that will give somebody a disability. They'll lose a limb, they'll lose an eye, hearing will be affected, or their equilibrium will be affected. And that puts my players in a position, and that's explained in session 0 that, this will be a part of it. And that puts my players in the position of having to function in a normal world with a disability, or what they perceive as a normal world with a disability. And it really brings it home to them to be able to experience that, and then having to figure out all the ways that we use to function in that world, that, people don't realize how much effort we put in to make it look easy. And
Oh, that's a mood.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, I've been told many times, well, you're not as blind as you act, are you? You know, and it's because I get where I'm used to seeing people's blurs, or if you're more than 3 foot away from me, you're lost in the blur. And you figure out ways to compensate for that yourself, and then you do it without thinking, and other people assume that, well, he really can see, he's just acting more blind than he is. And yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a feeling.
Oh yeah, I've my standard response now is, yeah, I've been accused of faking a lot, and that usually catches them off guard when I call them on what it is, and they start backtracking really quick. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, oh, go ahead.
I had a lady follow me one time in a restaurant that was a restaurant I was familiar with, and I got up and used my white cane and went to the bathroom and came back. And as it turned out, she was filming me on her phone the entire way, and came up to our table and accused me of being a faker, because obviously I couldn't have found the bathroom on my own or the way back to the table on my own. And it's just, first off, why does she care?
So I'm going to take this a little dark right now, and I'm apologizing in advance, and I'm going to put out a quick trigger warning for anyone. We're going to be talking briefly about COVID. We're going to be talking about medical discrimination, and the consequences of that, and death. And this is going to be a brief couple of minutes, but it's a super important couple of minutes, and it's why we're having this conversation in some ways, because as much as it's great to talk about tabletop gaming, we need to talk about the consequences of ableism, because people don't understand. Yesterday, a man died in a hospital in Texas. He had 5 children and a wife. He was a quadriplegic, and the reason he died is they decided not to ventilate him when he had COVID, because he was a quadriplegic, and the doctors decided he didn't have a quality of life that warranted being ventilated.
Wow.
Many states have state-issued guidelines that include that kind of discrimination against disability. And what happens when we don't see the spectrum of disability as possible, where we see it as binaries, where we see lives as valuable and not valuable, as you have a thing or you don't, you're faking it or you're not. These are the things that subtly inform the way that non-disabled people and people in positions of power to make those kinds of decisions decide whether our lives have value. That's why these conversations are so incredibly important. And that's why getting characters into the worlds that we create, whether it's in television, whether it's in games, who are disabled, is so important, because people need to see that these characters are just as valuable and just as important, and by extension the people they are representing are just as valuable and just as important, and their lives have just as much meaning as anyone else. In addition, this man was Black, and so it's a multiply marginalized situation. So that also informs the percentage of arrests. People who are disabled people have it's like 2/3 of arrests, and when you're talking about the Black community, that goes up even more. The deaf community has a particularly high rate of arrest. The autistic community has a particularly high rate of arrest. So you're dealing with these things. This isn't just in a bubble. This isn't like we wake up and our day-to-day moving in the world experience is different. This has massive consequences for lives. so these discussions are, to me, have the potential to start changing minds in a way that is life-saving. I want to get to some questions, but I want to give everyone a chance to add to that, because I think this only happened yesterday, and it's super important, but it's also something we've been afraid of from the beginning of this.
I think as well, like you said, it informs people's perspectives of us, like, you know, able people and such. I think also as well, like, because I haven't gone through it myself, it informs a disabled person's perspective of themselves. It's so damaging. I was 13 when my doctor told me that I had a reduced quality of life. To tell a 13-year-old that to their face in front of their parents, and then my parents were like, well, a doctor said it, so I agree. And it's like, okay, cool, then like my life must not be worth a lot, which I know now it's worth so much. But to be told that is just horrible. And I've talked about it on Twitter before, that like I believe role-playing really can change people's minds and perspectives, because, you know, you're being faced with these situations, and you learn the right way to respond to them and how to react to them, and you understand then the struggles of disabled people with the medical system and with day-to-day life. Like, I still get it now, that it doesn't matter if I'm using my cane or my crutches or I'm using my walker, but I'll go to the doctors and I get free medicine because you know, I'm not fully employed, I don't make enough money, and I'm also disabled. And I'll always have a comment from someone who really, it costs nothing to mind your own business, and yet they'll go, oh, you don't need that much, or why do you get free medicine? And it's like, because if I don't, I'm in chronic pain all the time. And as well, like in the medical system, I, along with the reduced quality of life, I also got told that I was a hypochondriac, and I got told that from like age 11 when my problems first started to about age about 16, and I constantly got told that, and to constantly think it, and then have my parents also reinforce it, because they don't know what else to believe other than what a doctor's told them, and they won't listen to me, the person experiencing it. And it turned out that for 5 years I had been walking on a dislocated hip that never went back in properly, and they didn't find out until they did an operation, and that has had like massive medical consequences now on that hip. And I don't think able people realize that, there's a medical system, but it's kind of set against you from the beginning if you're disabled. Even though that these people are supposed to help you, they'll try and find every excuse not to, in my experience, or they will, but they try and take as long as they can to help you. And I think it's really important that it gets brought up in a safe place, like role playing, and you know, you can help people understand these things, and open a discussion that I think a lot of people as well are afraid to open, especially like able people, opening that discussion with disabled people.
I want to say right now too, I think we are gonna, everyone has agreed on this panel to do a part 2, which I think we're gonna need, because we haven't been even able to get to that through our own question list, much less the things that are being asked in chat. So I think that's gonna have to happen. But I am saving all of the questions that are being asked in chat, so please keep asking them, and they will get answered.
Please keep asking.
Yes.
And
that's
also,
why we're here.
We are online. We are, you know, available to do that, but we will have another structured forum also, where I am not racing because my alarm didn't go off, so I have my head in the game in advance. Yay! Let's Oh, go ahead.
I think Honey had she mentioned in our Zoom chat wanting to talk about what you had brought up, Jen.
Go ahead, please, Honey.
So the story that was shared yesterday, it didn't make me chuckle in a haha, this is funny kind of way. It made me chuckle in a, this is not for me news, and that's a sad thing.
Yeah.
So when I say I have physical challenges and medical challenges, some of them that I was born with, issues like scoliosis and kyphosis and all the rest of that. And because of my allergies and because of how my, body reacts to things, the choices that we have made have been, I use physical fitness to build up the muscles in my spine in my back to keep my spine forward instead of getting surgery. There was a huge pushback, but that was a choice we made knowing how my body reacts to things. But the one thing that pretty much changed the direction of my life was a disability that was given to me by a medical doctor doing something against my consent. I'm not going to go into details, but it resulted in me having grand mal seizures anytime I was unconscious for 5 years of my life. So the period of time between 19 to your mid-20s when you're going to college and you're meeting people and getting, that foundation, I was mostly housebound. Now, I say that to preface, it was not diagnosed until 5 years in what exactly was going on. I was accused, I remember having a medical file that said basically I had a facetious disorder because I was a high achiever, and that what I was having were panic attacks. Now, the kind of person that I am, I said, well, if I'm going to be housebound anyways, I might as well just go get another degree. That's how my brain works. But one thing that helped me get through a lot was creativity, being able to build worlds, being able to tell stories to people, and so on. So I say that to say, when I was given the choice to officially go on disability, because I did qualify, I remember saying no, because I'm already Black, I'm already a female, I'm already on those two lists. I didn't want to add another thing where I was going to be on another list where people were going to judge and say that you're not just. So I even worked with this condition with people thinking me coming in exhausted was because I partied over the weekend. So when they say that the concept of life unworthy of life or having a lower quality of life, especially in minority communities, this is not there was a news article and read about. This is a daily thing in nursing homes, in schools where there's children with disabilities, in hospitals, in communities. It is a regular thing. So me getting through everything that I went, and people accuse me of toxic positivity and all this kind of stuff, is because I should not be alive by all reporting everything that was in my system. You're supposed to have high of arsenic in the human body where it's dangerous is about 45 to 50. I had 140 arsenic in my system, which was causing my body to go into toxic shock every time I lost consciousness. So it's a miracle that I am alive and have gotten through quite a bit. And that is why panels about accessibility, normalizing conversations where I go to my player and ask, what do you need? Do you need a break? Do you have medication that you want to take in front of people or don't want to take in front of people? Can you sit for long periods of time? If you cannot, does this room work for you? Because I know what my sensitivities are. I want to know what your sensitivities are so that when we come together, we can have the best time possible. So people look at me, see me hit the gym and work out or laugh and, go around and all the rest of that. And they don't even know, like I have a whole herbal store, like health food store is my cabinet, just all of these supplements that I have to take and medications that I have to take just to stay upward and mobile. So when you mention accessibility and value of life, and I remind people to love your you, because once you can do that, you have a little bit more strength to go and help somebody else, because you want them to have a different experience than you did.
I think what you said about, you know, being a high achiever, so, oh, you can't be disabled because you're doing so well. I remember getting that for so long, and that's what prevented me from getting my diagnosis, was everyone telling me like, oh, you're so smart and you're so good at this, and like you're fine. There's no way you could be insert neurodivergent problem here or neurodivergent condition here, where it's like no one could see the fact like how much I struggle with being in classroom settings or just talking to people. And I get that a lot also, like now as a creator, because I DM and I'm on stream a lot and I write a bunch, and everyone's like, I didn't talk about it for a while because I was afraid people would see me and go, yeah, you can't be autistic, you're super social and you DM and you are super theatrical, so you know that you can't be autistic. Because when anyone hears that, they just assume like the stereotypical Hollywood cis white young man who's really good at doctoring and sciencey stuff but can't talk to people, and they see me and they're like, no, you're fine, you're good, you're a high achiever. Or worse, they'll fall into the Asian stereotype of, you know, oh, you're Asian, you're so smart because you're Asian. And that one happens a lot. Or like, you're super good with numbers because you're Asian. And it's so hard to get that validation when you get that idea of where that idea of quality of life is so ingrained in everyone, that if you have a disability, you automatically have a worse life. And that isn't true by a long measure. Is it more difficult because society is not built for us? Yes, but that doesn't make life any less worth living.
I think I also, people don't see that the great gifts we gain from our disabilities. Like for me, I am so good at planning because I have to. I'm a producer because I have to produce every moment of my life. People don't understand that I think weeks ahead, because I never know what my energy levels are going to be. I never know what joints are going to be working. I never know if I'm going to flare. I never know if I'm going to end up in a hospital. Like, so I'm going to plan all the things, and people tell me I overplan and all of this, but that's what makes me a good producer. That's how I'm good at my job. And I think that those sorts of things, I want to try and bring it back to games, because we are going to have to wrap up. But like, how do you see your experience with disability as an asset in gaming, and what do you think is the best takeaway people can have from what would you like people to take away from this conversation about what to bring into their games to make their games more inclusive and accessible?
Asking people what they need and then following through, and not assuming that because you're blind or you're deaf that whatever they read about someplace or they thought of is the one thing. There's, literally thousands of different types of blindness, and none of them are the same. And the very best and very first thing you need to do is ask what the player needs to have in order to play the game and enjoy themselves.
For me, I would like to say that with respect to invisible disabilities or invisible illnesses or whatever, don't mistake the person's ability to adapt, to survive in this world as like the person lying about what they're dealing with to get attention. Yeah. I will never understand that whole narrative, but that exists. That's like an underlying thing that isn't, and it kind of runs to what you were saying, Blind, like, understand that everything exists on a spectrum. So if someone says they're blind and they can see certain things, they're not lying. That's just where the measure is for them, where the line draws. So it's like talking to your players.
Exactly.
Understanding.
To tie in, I would like people to take away from what Blind Temple said is about asking what people need and then following through on it. Normalize the fact that some people may need to use audio dice rollers. It's absolutely fine for someone to use an audio dice roller.
Yes.
That is something I have actually been met with before, where I've been in a group, somebody needed it, and they went, oh, but that takes away from the experience. No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
It's no different
Yeah.
to your friend rolling a dice and going, I got a 20. It's no different, like at all. So please normalize that. Normalize handing out like handouts. You can still make the, their scrolly hand fun writing version, but make sure that there's a clear version and a dyslexic friendly version for someone at the table, because not everything is legible to everyone. Make sure, normalize your players asking you to repeat things, or GMs asking to repeat things, because as somebody who has it a lot, brain fog is like terrible. Medical fog as well, when like you've taken your tablets and it's like all of a sudden it's just like literally I kind of visualize mine as kind of being like a glass like wall in front of me where everyone's very muted coming through. So like normalize asking questions again and again. And a good place to start, I think, for DMs out there who want to DM for disabled people or want to DM for disabled characters, make sure that you use your 5 senses when you describe things, instead of what characters are just seeing. Say what they can hear or what they can smell. If they can taste something in the air, what do they feel under their hands or under their feet, etc., or against their skin. And I also do like a kind of 6th sense as well, with like you get a feeling from a place. If they go in a spooky place and this person is either deaf or blind, you can describe, the really kind of like unnerving, unsettling feeling that they get from the place as well. Like normalize that, because that's like a really good starting point, I think, for a lot of DMs, is to like, use those 5 senses and an emotional description, and pretty much everyone at your table then is kind of covered in like what their character is experiencing, and more importantly what they themselves are experiencing if they also have a disability.
For me, I agree with what everyone said. And I think it's really important to have that conversation of like talking to people and making sure like what do you need and how to help. I think it's also important to normalize explicitly asking, hey, are you okay? Because you get a lot of people who, especially when things come up on stream, when it's like, oh, they should have read the room or something like that. And for me, I genuinely cannot read the room. I can't process facial expressions. And so normalize just stepping out of character for a moment and going, are you okay? Is this good? Are you having fun? What can I do better? And stuff like that. Exercise not a lot, but have patience for sometimes, or for some people, and especially when you're playing with new people, it might take a couple games for people to get acclimated to the group, and to be able to recognize patterns when people, their players are want to speak or don't want to speak and stuff like that. I know when I'm a player, it takes me about a session to understand and key into what everyone else around the table looks like when they're about to speak. And so I normally like I'll freeze up and I won't talk because I don't know when to interject. But I had something and then it went away. Yeah, just take that time to just make that open communication explicit and available, and normalize asking, are you okay, as not an accusatory thing, because sometimes people, when you ask someone they're okay, it's like, yeah, of course I'm okay, why would you ask that? And I've gotten that response a lot of that over cautiousness of people wanting to dismiss that out of hand. And I want to normalize that, and also normalize saying, I'm actually struggling a lot with this, can you help me? And just making that conversation just part of the game, part of what you do, and normalize stepping out of character, and even redoing things if that you didn't realize something.
So we actually, Honey, I'm going to have you start with yours, and also your sign off, just where people can find you, because we are actually, they were kind enough to give us some extra time since we had to start late, but we got to wrap up. So if you want to include yours with your sign off, and we'll go around and say goodbye.
I'm always going to encourage people to remember to love themselves. Like I think that's the foundation for any good table is love, empathy, and respect, mutual appreciation. It's really not rocket science, but if you normalize actually caring about the people that you're playing with, you see a lot of doors to accessibility and acceptance open. At least that's been my experience, whether it's disabilities, second languages, whatever it is. I've never had a table of people that I haven't been able to accommodate because we start from that foundation of just genuinely loving and caring for each other. And with that, I am Honey, aka Honey and Dice. You can find me on Twitter at Honey and Dice. I'm basically just everybody's biggest cheerleader. I love to see people succeed and grow and go. And this wonderful panel of people are people I really respect. Or Jen wouldn't have been able to get me on this panel because
Honey is the best. I love you so much. You're so wonderful.
I love you all, and thank you.
Thank you.
Temple, do you want to sign off?
Yep, I'm Blind Temple at Blind Temple on Twitter. If you had any questions that you needed to ask about the blind community or gaming and stuff in general, you feel free to ask them on Twitter from me, or if you don't want to ask them out loud, my DMs are always open. I do not hesitate to ask me questions. That's why I'm there. And one more thing, if I could, DMs, allow people to use electronics at your table.
Yes.
Some of us, that's the only way we can interact. Please.
Also, folks, I'm going to say it for Temple since I don't think he'll say it for himself, but Temple is looking for a kidney donor. So please, if you are able to get tested and reach out to Temple and get information about how to do that.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome. Alicia?
Hey, my name is Alicia Marie. You can find me at Alicia Marie Body because I'm a fitness type on Instagram and Twitter. And one thing I wanted to mention is if you'll notice, this entire cast was closed captioning for the hearing impaired. This is something I didn't know existed until I played in a charity stream with Scaraticus Academy. And seeing more people use it in their streams to me is so important. And I would love it if other people who streamed Dungeons and Dragons could look into the technology and integrate that into their streaming games so that people like me who are hard of hearing or deaf and don't have the CI and need sign language can participate, can listen, can be a part of your game just by watching. So it's just something to consider.
It's web captioner. It's free.
Web captioner.
You just go on a website, you open a website, start captioning, and plug it into your broadcasting software. Super easy.
Really important.
Sarah.
I'm Sarah, or you probably also know me. I said earlier it's Mustang or Mustangs Art. You can follow me on Twitter at Mustangs Art. And I'll just plug it in because today I am also doing a stream on my own channel, which is you can come and ask generally about just disability and TTRPGs in general. You can I will also be playing The Witcher 3 whilst I do so, if that sweetens the pot for anyone. I'm gonna go and practice playing it now so I don't look like an idiot when it comes to the stream. You can find me there. I also do a lot of TTRPG writing. I write supplements based on disability, creating disability mechanics. I also have a work email now, which you can find in my bio on my Twitter as well. So if you want to reach out, you don't have to just send me work stuff there. If you've got like a question that you don't feel comfortable asking on Twitter openly, you can always just email me and I will answer when I have the time. Thank you all so much for coming out to actually, listen to this because it's very important. means a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to everyone else here, that people genuinely are interested in opening this dialogue and making games more accessible and more representative. I don't know, it just warms my heart, especially lately, because I've seen so much improvement and active improvement going on in the community. People really are trying. It really does, just genuinely means a lot.
Mac.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie, or Mac, Mackenzie Lane DA on Twitter. You can find me there yelling about a bunch of my projects, including Sina Una, streaming over on Gilding Light, doing stuff with MCDM and D&D Beyond, a bunch of stuff. You can also find me talking a little bit about my own experience with accepting my brain for what it is, and learning about that, because as I mentioned at the top of this panel, accepting my disability and finding my place as a disabled person in the community is something I'm currently going through and working on, and I try to be open about it, because I don't know who else out there might need to see someone doing their best to figure out how to use their body and their mind.
And I am Jen Kretschmer. You can find me on Twitter as @DreamWisp. You can find me on Twitch as DreamWispJen. You can find me on Beyond Heroes playing Alindra. I am going to recommend one thing before we sign off, which is the Fate Accessibility Toolkit through Evil Hat. It is an amazing source book written by disabled people, a group of disabled people, about their disabilities and how to put those into play respectfully and accurately, while also chronicling their experience. So you are supporting disabled people, you are supporting disabled people in gaming, and you are supporting respectfully and accurately putting people into the world, even though it's not specific to D&D. Most of it can translate one for one. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Part 2 will be happening. Hopefully we can get more time so we can get more into gaming. And have a wonderful day. Thank you all, each and every one of you, so much for being here.
Thank you, Jen.
The best.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Okay.